welcome to the podcast. This is Every Trivial Fact. Is that China speaking there? This meeting's being recorded.
Gave me the option to leave the meeting.
Well, it's a Chinese program, isn't it?
The Zoom, yeah. I'm sure they're really enjoying all the intelligence they're gaining on the U.S. by listening to the Nietzsche podcast.
Like Facebook, right? They got profiles on all of us.
I hope so. I hope my credit score, I hope I get it pre-approved for good social credit loan.
I might need to borrow from you. But here we are. Hello and welcome to Every Trivial Fact. I'm your host. My name is No One. And today I'm joined by my friend Keegan Kjeldsen, writer, thinker, guitarist for doom metal band Destroyer of Light, host of the Nietzsche Podcast. Keegan, thanks for joining me. It's always been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. There's my radio audition. It's it might not be the best future to invest in. But speaking of the future, I hear you do have a bunch of musical projects going at the moment. Care to share on those?
Well, I had one that I recently left actually, and then that opened the way for something new. And I probably shouldn't talk about the details of leaving the other project too much, but I'll just say that we had recorded probably one of the best records of my life mostly in 2020, and then we finished it in 2021, and it still isn't out yet. And I'm not sure if it ever will be or what the status of that is. So me and the vocalist of that band. What's up?
Did you call it the greatest recording of your life?
So far. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's languishing at the moment because we had internal disputes on some of the details of the release. I'm probably already saying too much with this because we like to keep everything like really private about like interband decisions and stuff. But I mean, I guess it was the genesis of another project, right? So the vocalist and myself left kind of one after the other.
And now I want to hear it. Damn.
But we talked about it, and we're both bummed out about what happened. But at the same time, my attitude that I've been trying to instill in him, and the vocalist that I'm going to go with, he's the singer of a band called Monte Luna, also from Boston. But I've told him, like, no, the next record's going to be even better than that, and it is. I think is going to be even better. So that's, I think, the way to do it. Just keep going forward, keep going into the future, and I know it'll come out someday. Because if the remaining members of the band don't want to release it, eventually we will. Years down the line, if it has to be.
I look forward to hearing that one. And you just came off of a tour. How was that? It's been been a while with the plague season, right?
Plague season, plague years.
It is plague years at this point.
So I talked about it a little bit on the last Nietzsche podcast. I kind of reserved the last 30 minutes to talk about it, but it was, long story short, it was a series of really great shows punctuated by a series of minor disasters and catastrophes that we were able to surmount until the van's engine died in Oregon.
Oh.
And we finished the tour in a UHaul cargo truck, which was not bad, actually.
Well, I was going to say, it's kind of like a microcosm for life or marriage or any number of things.
It really is. Well, I mean, when you're in the position we were in, I think I mentioned this on the podcast as well, but a lot of people told us, wow, I can't believe you guys stuck that out and you committed. And I mean, I guess I won't turn down people saying, wow, I really respect y'all for that and all that. But what else were we going to do, really? I mean, just fly home? Is that a better plan? Everyone buys a plane ticket. And then meanwhile, we make no money to pay our way home, right? It's whatever we do, it's going to be some variation of us renting a vehicle and driving home. We might as well rent a vehicle that can tow our trailer and make the rest of the shows that we can make and offset that cost as much as we can. So on the one hand, you have to be a little bit, what would I say? we'll just say stupidly determined or stubborn or
Sure.
something like that. You have to be
Willfully stupid. That one.
crazy,
Nietzsche.
naive optimism. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I
Whatever.
like unreasonably happy. That's what I like.
Right. You have to kind of have that attitude. But on the other hand, it was really the only thing that we could do. And so it's like one of those things that later on you look back on and you say, well, it was an adventure. Actually, though, it wasn't that bad even when we were doing it. It was just, there were things that we had to change. I mean, when we got into the desert and by the time we got to Las Vegas, it's like already getting up to like in the upper 90s during the day. So we had to drive at night. So there are things like that we had to plan for. Coming through the immigration checkpoint on Interstate 10 on the way home was fun. Because
did they bust you for hauling mariachi bands?
Well, so I mean, they have like x-rays and heat sensors and shit. So if you try and just go through the border checkpoint with two people in the back of a cargo truck, they'll like no. And then they're gonna open up everything and tear up everything, and they never help you put it back. So we were like, let's just all get crammed into the cabin and hopefully they'll let us through, and they did. So
So UHaul's in the music business and they don't even know it.
Oh, they know it. I mean, a lot of bands.
Well, I don't know. Okay, yeah, I didn't know what.
Well, like rent U-Haul trailers,
alternative,
like not the whole box truck. I mean, that's kind of crazy because two people were basically riding in the back of just a cargo hold that isn't climate controlled and it's not airtight and it's loud as hell and it's not technically legal or safe or any of that. But we were renting trailers from them for years. It is always a little weird though, because when you're returning the rental in town, if you have something go wrong with the trailer and you call them and suddenly you're out of state, even if you tell them you're going to go out of state, they always kind of freak out about it. Like, you're supposed to bring this back to Austin. What are you doing in Tennessee? Right. So it can, I don't know. We've actually had quite a few adventures with U-Haul, like renting us like faulty equipment. That's like, we've had trailer tires blow on U-Hauls we rented and we got pulled over because one of the registration is out of date for 2 years. They rented us one time with like a leak in it that like got all our gear wet. So generally I've had bad things to say about U-Haul, but hey, that was how we got home. Man. So I guess I can't badmouth them too much.
I was gonna say, I didn't think we'd get into fighting the man here. Freaking big U-Haul.
Big U-Haul.
Yeah, screwing over. Speaking of screwing over musicians, what do you think of Ticketmaster? They're still around, right? Like they still do their service fees, and they're like, I want to say like a lot of big bands from like old and new alike have tried to protest them and this and that, but they like, what are they? The primary monopoly in the music industry?
Well, so it's kind of weird. So I've seen that this is like kind of blown up as a topic recently.
Yeah, but it's been around
about this for a while. It's been around for a while.
Yeah.
The thing is, we don't, at the level we're at, we don't really have to deal with that. The funny thing is really what the Ticketmaster thing. So if people don't know about their business model, they basically have, I think the way they have it set up is that they're contractor. I'm not exactly sure, but people go and scalp the tickets online and then resell them through Ticketmaster. And, but the venues don't want to fight Ticketmaster on this because they make up so much of their business, right? So Ticketmaster basically gets to just process those fees. That's all they really care about. The scalpers get to make a bunch of money. And then, so this went on for so long that,
it's a really bad business model.
That artists now will like buy out seats from Ticketmaster for like their family and friends and stuff like that. Or like Justin Bieber bought out like a whole section, right? Or for like guests and stuff like that. And I've even heard of artists going in and buying a bunch through Ticketmaster so that they can be the ones to resell the tickets and get more profit from it through Ticketmaster, which is funny because, so if anyone is experienced in the music industry, when you break into the music industry, especially if you live in like LA or some shit, there are a lot of clubs that want you to pay to play. And we've never done that. We're very much against it. Austin as a city is very against that model. But one of the things about that
Right.
model that's kind of predatory is the booking agent basically says, oh yeah, you want to play this show, here's 40 tickets, you're going to pay me for those 40 tickets, but then you can sell them to your fans. And if you have a poll, I mean, because that's the thing, I understand it from like a cold calculating business model perspective, right? It's like you just want to pack people in the door, and bands come in all the time and they say, yeah, we'll pack 40 people in here. It's like, oh, really? Go sell 40 tickets. And then they quickly find it's really freaking hard to sell 40 tickets, right? To your fan, especially if it's like $10, $15, $20 a pop or whatever, which it can be if you're like, because especially pay to play shows, usually it's to buy on to like, okay, a big touring act is coming through. So you're definitely going to get new fans, but you need to bring in a certain number of people. And so every ticket that you don't sell, basically, it's like you start out like taking a big loss, and then you can sell that loss away, right? And so I was thinking about it in relation to the Ticketmaster thing, and I'm like, wow, it kind of sucks that if you're Justin Bieber, you're still paying to play. You're still buying tickets and selling them just through Ticketmaster. Ticketmaster is making the big artists pay to play. Like they're putting them on the same model that young exploited artists get onto. And so I think that's kind of hilarious on one level.
Did even at that level, it still sucks.
Yeah, I've been working on an episode on Wagner that's about to come out. Nietzsche's relationship to Wagner, and it's a delight to learn that Wagner was always in debt, and like he's ascending to be one of the most famous composers in Europe, and he's just getting deeper and deeper into debt. And anytime he gets money, he like gets paid royal patronage and stuff, and he's just using it to like, okay, I need to fund bigger artistic ventures, right?
It's the usual culprits like hookers and blow, heroin,
yeah,
the big one.
Well, I mean, in terms of but it's like he's not ever like, okay, how do I get out of debt and be financially stable? It's like, oh, I'm in a bunch of debt. How am I going to finance this new opera house? Right. Like it's
with somebody else's money.
Right. And so it's funny to me. It's like, oh, I guess nothing changes. Like unless you're like, I guess maybe for people like Kanye West, it changes. Like if you're like that filthy rich, but you're still doing the scramble even as a big artist on some level. I don't know.
Right. Well, I remember, what was it? Pearl Jam. They were protesting Ticketmaster. What years? Like 10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, I remember that.
And yeah, maybe they still are. I don't know. Yeah, and then I know a lot
no one knows because no one has heard from Pearl Jam and I'm sorry, Pearl Jam fans, but
hey, they're still relevant. Hey, they're still. It reminds me like back in I think it was 2017.
It's like grandpa music now.
Well, speaking of grandpa music, Bob Dylan released this like 17-minute song on JFK. I want to say it was like 2017. And it's like, yep, way to stay topical, Bob. Way to stay, you're keeping in touch with the youth and the rebellion culture. Everyone's over here worried about JFK.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure it went over well with hey, people buying new Bob Dylan records are probably our boomers. So yeah, I don't know.
I was just thinking like for the pulse of the times, even in 2017, right? Like we were already headed to where we're at now.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Bob Dylan's like work for the past couple decades. And I'm not just saying that like generic, like there's a lot of bands that are, or artists who are really old who still produce really good work. Bob Dylan really hit or miss, really uneven.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you there actually. Yeah.
Just doing nothing but trash talking since I came on your podcast.
Well, what about Neil Young?
I have no, hey.
No. I mean, no. I'm mainly his music. I'm going like, what about his music? Right.
His music is I think the majority of it is owned by Blackstone. So look up that investment firm if you think that Neil Young like made a principled stand. As far as his music, Neil Young's amazing.
Look, the forensics never lie, man. They really don't.
Yeah, I mean, like Harvest Moon, timeless classic.
Thrashers.
Castles. I love Into the Black or Into the Blue.
Sure.
Out of the Blue, Into the Black. I forget. There's like two. It's the song. It's like there's like a folk version and then there's a rock and roll version, and I always forget which is which.
Did you ever hear?
It's the one that Cobain quotes in his Suicide Note. Zach Wild, the guitarist.
His cover of not Harvest Moon, Heart of Gold.
Heart of Gold. Oh, I have not heard that.
Okay,
that sounds interesting. Okay, I'm assuming there's some like pinch harmonics on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's he's pretty distinctive, right? You can like, I guess. Okay, here, this is an interesting topic in general. The sound and tone of a guitarist. From like you hear him and you're like, I know who that is, and it doesn't matter if they're old or new. It's like if they have a distinctive voice, because I think about this in terms of communication, not too different than even when we speak, but like musically speaking, it's like, okay, name any band or whatever. And it's like right away, I think like, okay, can you hear them distinctly out of anyone else? And it's often, if they're, I guess if they do have an established identity and voice, then you do. But then there's a lot of music.
Well, it's amazing that
necessarily know.
It's amazing that so many young artists begin by trying to consciously emulate the exact sound of other artists.
Oh, you mean like no one Zach has? Wild?
Well, no, I mean like bands that you go see. Maybe I'm unusual because I see live bands playing guitar music all the time, and there's probably some people out there for whom that's like a kind of a crazy thing to say, like that they don't watch any of that, but you'll see you see a band.
You mean like just jam bands?
You immediately know.
Or
no, I mean like bands opening for us, or bands that at shows in town, or I'm going to see somebody and I catch like a new band, and you can immediately tell, oh, you like Pantera, or you want to sound like
so you know what I mean, like it's
right. But right sometimes it's like, right, we'll just there was a band we played with in this last tour, and we just when we were talking about them amongst ourselves, we were like, oh, Metallica, because it was exactly like Metallica.
Well, and so early thrash Metallica,
no bad Metallica. Like Give Me Fuel, Give Me Fire Metallica. But I like he called them country western. That's a good dig.
Well, they kind of went there with the Black Album, and
like I'm still talking shit. But anyway, I guess that's the mood I'm in. But what I was going to say
you do it very politely, so it works. It's endearing.
But what I was going to say is it's the same way with guitarists, right? So what I was going to say, when you see a band and you know exactly who they want to sound like, and maybe they do sound like a facsimile of that band, but no one's ever become like one of the great bands by trying to sound like someone else. Even though a lot of those artists do begin that way, and I actually love a lot of those albums, so maybe I'm contradicting myself here, but like you talk about early Metallica, it's like you listen to that first Metallica, if you're somebody out there who knows a little bit about Metallica for their big records, go listen to the No Life Till Leather demo. It sounds like Judas Priest meets Motorhead. It's very derivative, but I really like it because you see like kind of the seeds of what they would do later, right? Of like how they would harvest something out of that. But that being said, it's like the reason why they became a great band isn't because they perfected sounding like Motorhead, right? Because Motorhead already exists, and you're not going to scratch that itch better than Motorhead does for people. And so it's very like, it's incredibly, it's like the artistic imperative that you find your own distinctive voice if you want to be not forgotten, because it happens to bands all the time. We're in the van, we're listening to like some mid-level underground band, right? And a lot of them sound similar to each other, and it's like, oh, is this so and so? No, it's so and so. Oh yeah, they sound really similar to each other, right?
And Black it's Abyss like, Raucus? No, it's Space Wizard Moon Knight.
It's Wizard. It's Wizard Witch. It's Dragon Castle.
Is this electric lizard?
Yeah.
Eye poker? No.
Electric lizard.
No,
Eclectic wizard.
This is bong ripping space goblin.
Right. Yeah. The oh man, and that's,
love the band name.
It's one of those things. It's one of those things about doom metal that everyone's aware of how fucking ridiculous like the naming conventions are, and everyone makes fun of it. And yet people know that if you put Bong Witch on your record, I'm sorry if there is a band out there called Bong Witch. I'm not taking a shot at you. I've never heard you, but because there probably is. But yes. People know you put that on a record, and it'll
Well, I think
there's something about the boilerplate thing that's like it's like a betrayal of like the artistic project in exchange for having, it's like hedging your bet, right? It's like you're never gonna be like remembered. You're never gonna be one of those bands to people, right? That's like special. You're never gonna be like a Radiohead or the Beatles or Kanye West or anything if you do like a boilerplate band where you just want to sound like this genre. But what that does is it gives you a much better chance of going and making some money for a few short years, and then maybe you can like parlay that into being a session player,
but isn't
or something
it
like that.
knowing your audience and kind of getting in where you fit in? Because what are your options really anyway? You know, they were never going to be on MTV like back when, and then compared to MTV back then, and then compared to now where it's, you know, the self-publishing and other kind of rules and deals and things people get into.
Well, I knew this guy who I just like met him at a bar. I didn't play in a band with him, but friends with them for like a couple of years, and I remember he was a drummer, and he didn't play when I met him like in any group, but he was basically saying, yeah, I was in all these like early 2000s metalcore bands, and so you know, if you don't know what that is, you can like look up that like that there's a whole aesthetic, and like basically the way he described it to me, right, he called it a marketing machine. And he was like, you get signed to a label, they book you a tour with like 4 bands that sound exactly the same as you. Everyone looks exactly the same. Everyone dresses exactly the same. And it's basically all the names, like you can just tell, like, you know, that they have that like same aesthetic to them as well. And we just go on tour, and he's like, and yeah, it's like no one of us is ever going to be like the big one that goes and packs stadiums, but we all like packed like mid-sized venues every night. Like you get 5 bands that are the same. Like there's like a whole scene behind it, right? And he was like, yeah, I just made money. Like, and then one day it ends, and it's like that trend is dead now. Nobody like
metalcore
like has this for anymore.
Yeah,
it's dead. Yeah, well, not entirely, but it's not where
and
you can just
screamo was adjacent, right? Like that was,
I think screamo I would say is a little before.
Yeah,
but yeah.
But it was trending in that same direction.
It's a very similar vibe. Screamo, though, I found a lot of those guys to be like more interesting, like composers.
I can see
there's a lot more because a lot of what Screamo comes out of is like post-hardcore, where they're using like some cool chords, and you know, the music can be really melodious. It's just the vocals are just well, it's in the name, you know.
Right. So in our talk here, you know, we talked about you talked about the musical voice, and I was actually thinking in terms of, you know, a band like, you know, we use the example of Metallica, and you know, a lot of times these bands will just make the same album year after year, so it's hard to blame anyone for wanting to try something new or novel. You know, I think someone who exemplifies it could be anyone from Tom Waits to you know, because he went from lounge singer crooner to friggin' weirdo, you know, in the bunch of Sky, and it's been there ever
ultimate weirdo.
Yeah, and I think he's a real artist.
God weirdo.
Yeah, because he's an artist, right? That's why.
Right.
That's why he's so well respected.
He doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone
give a shit what you think about his music. Like that's why, like,
oh, and he didn't come out protesting. I don't think he came out, you know, in recent years, and good on him if he didn't. It's hard to blame anyone, but I know part of the modern problem is that a lot of people don't want to say anything, like, you know, with social media and these other kind of trends, where because they know they're just going to get attacked, and it's like, you know, it's like a lot of celebrities have been shredded or canceled or whatever the case is.
Right. But are we you're saying maybe it's like it's good that he didn't say anything, because also on the other hand, we don't like who cares what like rich celebrities think?
Yes, on one hand, yes, and I think it's good that the celebrity allure, like now that the world can see what Americans really think and feel and how atrocious and, you know, backwards a lot of the behavior is, like some of that mystique can die, and I think that's a good thing, you know, because as a media obsessed culture, it's clearly affected people, and I mean that like with literal psychosis. And I'm not trying to say, heavy metal makes kids commit suicide. That's not what I'm saying, right? Nothing in that direction. But to the degree that, we're inseparable from the context and the zeitgeist and the pulse of the times, and I guess I can think of anything from like phenomenon like Columbine and school shootings to the Slender Man killings to so many other things. I don't mean to get too far away from this other topic here on voice, because I guess the difference is when I think of earlier Metallica and later Metallica, it's like they did the shift and then they stopped doing guitar solos on one of their Saint Anger or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then
that's a hilarious scene.
Yeah.
Saint Anger is a wonderful, if you can detach, like when you first see it, if you actually like the band Metallica, which it's kind of hard at this point because everyone's like, that movie's been out for a long time now and everyone kind of knows about it, but it's really sad. But it's also, if you can detach from it after all these years, it's hilarious.
Sure.
Because Kirk Hammett gets really angry that he can't do guitar solos anymore. He's like throwing his pen or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, well, then it's Metallica and it's thrash. It's like, what do you mean no guitar?
Right.
But and so it's like they
harebrained schemes.
Yeah, and then rather than it being an expression of an original voice or something profound or whatever it is.
Well, they say that the trend in music right now is not to do solos. So it's like, all right, I appreciate you doing something new, but you don't need to follow the trend. I mean, but okay, to go to something more fundamental, really.
Well, do we need a Twitter for music? Do we need to be like, all right, songs should no longer be more than 58 seconds?
Oh, dude, 15 seconds. Oh, yeah.
Okay, 15 seconds. Okay, that's good too.
Yeah, come on, man. What how about your career can't be longer than 15 years? That would be good. Well, because what I'm about to say
what about
is,
Slayer? Because they were consistent, right? Like I think about out of all the thrash bands,
you have like a yearly review after that for you to renew your license.
Oh, that's fun. I actually
like that. Are you still crushing it? All right, Iron Maiden, Slayer, Judas Priest. Yeah, you guys can keep going. King Diamond, you can keep singing. Right. But what I was going to say, though, I mean, yeah, I'm obviously if you not being serious, but in terms of, but I am kind of serious on the level of, okay, I'm going to quote from an incredibly philosophical film, Rocky III, where it has one of my favorite lines in it. Because, so everyone knows the song Eye of the Tiger. That's an actual line that Apollo Creed says to Rocky. But he's saying it in terms of like, the reason why you beat me, this isn't a direct quote, but he's like, the reason why you beat me when I was a champion is that you had the eye of the tiger. And when he elaborates on that, he's like, you were hungry. You were, a young fighter who had something to gain. And, I had everything to lose basically at that point. Right. But the line I think of is his trainer tells him at one point, he's like, Rocky, the thing that happened to you is the worst thing that can ever happen to a fighter. You got civilized. And that's what happened to Metallica. And that's why they started to suck. It's entirely a function of the fact that, like, after the Black Album, when you've toured for like 2 years straight, and you've played for like the biggest audience in the world at that point, and then you go on to like live a life of like wealth and luxury. I often say that Metallica in 1983 would have like beat the shit out of Metallica now.
Oh,
right? If they could go back in time.
No,
but they were
probably right.
Young and hungry. They were playing
I immediately
aggressive fucking music too.
Yeah, not metal up your ass. What was it actually called?
Kill 'Em All.
Yeah, Kill 'Em All. Right. That it was that. When I think of Hunger, I think of that album. And then there's so many other, it's really apparent in a lot of metal bands, and then plenty of other bands too, when you can hear that. And that's where the song grew. And then the years later they get clean and they get a few wives and kids, and, things just kind of go through. And then again, rather than you kind of lose, a lot of times you lose that original voice and it just sounds like they're quoting or satirizing themselves. And I guess that's why you
well, especially
preserve artistic integrity. Okay, so the governmental department of artistic integrity was like, the excuse can be, we're doing this for your sake, right?
It's like it should be like a Hunger Games, really.
I'm okay with American celebrity. It's
if you want to keep, Well, like, well, not just a little bit, like working artists, like past a certain number of years, like, all right, if you want to keep doing this, you have to fight to the death against other artists, and whichever ones are
Oh, that
left.
would keep that hunger
Um,
alive. Yeah.
right? Yeah, and a lot of them would take the smart route, and they'd be like, you know what, made my millions, I'm done. Because that's the thing. The energy that's on Kill 'Em All
Sorry.
is literally impossible for somebody who's shopping at the Gucci store in
Oh,
Milan to conjure up. It's
oh,
literally fucking
no, that's.
impossible.
Do you ever see that meme with Danzig and it's like punk rock didn't die, it just stopped to get cat food or kitty
Yes,
litter?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Glenn
yeah.
Danzig.
Danzig is another one where
Oh,
it's like,
dude, I love. I mean, the Misfits are good, but I love his metal. I mean, I loved his metal. I
yeah,
can't, because a lot of me, I'll be honest, man. A lot of music and metal music, especially, it's like they hold special what spots in my heart, but it's not necessarily like I don't necessarily listen to it that much these days, or you know what I mean. I don't find myself in the mosh pit as often as I did, and all that stuff too. Um,
yeah. Well, Danzig's strange because he's now decided that he can make movies. And he's made like a couple of them, and
are they
they're
good?
really bad.
Oh.
No, they're really bad.
Is that intentional?
I don't get that vibe. Like, I mean, I think a lot of you can set out trying to make like it's like a corny bad movie and still make like a legitimately bad movie that's not fun to watch, right? And
so not like
unfortunately,
Tommy
that's
Wiseau. Because I mean, they look a little bit alike, right?
they do. It is a weird thing with well, they if anyone's like a fan of Red Letter Media, they talk about like the filmmaker. There's a lot of like B movie guys who like write, direct, star in like their own movies.
Oh, that
and
was
they
Peter
all like
Jackson before Lord of the Rings, right? I don't know if he was in it, but
but a lot
he
of
did
them
that.
like walk around in like black tank tops and stuff like that. It's like so it's like a stereotype. It's like, oh, the black tank top guy, middle-aged white dude who thinks like he's going to be the badass in the movie. So that's all like applies to Tommy Wiseau at certain points. He in that film, Neil
Yeah.
Breen is another guy like that. But yeah, if we get off onto this topic, it'll take up the whole podcast because I could talk about The Room for like a whole like 2
Yeah, just
hours. I could
dedicate
talk
it to it.
about it for
I
the
got
length
game.
of the film.
So anyway, how is your sex life?
I can't
Or
talk about it.
The best one. He beat her up so bad he put her in the hospital. What a story, Mark.
Oh yeah, what a story. Yeah,
So-
I personally like the manic editing when of the sound editing when he goes in to buy roses. And then the lady says, where he says, "Thanks, have a nice day." And she just immediately after, with no break, goes, "You're my favorite customer." And it just sounds like clipped in. It's great.
Have you heard that? Because I came to the same conclusion before I saw this written anywhere, but it totally gives me the vibe of, again, if aliens came down and tried to make a human movie, it would be kind of like this.
Right.
Well,
There is the theory that he's like a vampire.
Oh yeah,
because he like said that he made the money to make The Room by importing leather jackets from Korea or something like that. It was some story. It's like, what? It doesn't track. And he's claimed to be an American. And when people have inquired, because they're like, obviously you're from Europe, he said, no, I'm from New Orleans. And then when really pressed, he apparently said, I used to live in Paris, but that was, quote, a long time ago. And I mean, just the way he looks in general.
because he does. It's amazing because he doesn't sound New Orleans. He doesn't sound French. He doesn't sound
No.
any.
But those
of
are two
things.
cities that vampires are known to live in. If we're being real, like, you know that vampires, if they're living in America, they're living in New Orleans. I think that was Queen of the Damned starts out in New Orleans, actually.
Yeah, no,
So it's another amazing film. R.I.P. Elia. But yeah, so I think he's a vampire. That's my psychoanalysis of Tommy Wiseau.
Yeah, he well could be. I mean, he could be from Romania or friggin' Poland or.
Oh, all vampires are Romanian now, huh?
No, well, I don't mean to be
Check
stereotypical.
your privilege.
But okay, well, check this out. Is the story, because I think I asked you before about Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is a great story, but there is this fear of foreigners in there, because the whole premise is, I guess, are you familiar with that premise of, it's in that story particularly, where for them to take root in England, they buy property, they make their way there, and then they have to set their coffins on their native soil. So, it's like, to the degree that all horror stories are in fact allegorical, there's no way around it, right? It's representative of our fears. And even something like, well, the unknown, the nameless, the formless, that's a category of fear that houses all the other fears, and this is, I'm thinking of Lovecraft's, the oldest fear of mankind is the unknown, after
Yeah.
strongest emotion is fear, and then the oldest is fear of the unknown.
Yeah, I've never thought about that actually, that Dracula and it's in Nosferatu too.
Yeah, they
have to be buried. They can only sleep in the goddamn soil in which they were buried, as I recall, is the quote.
Yep. Damn vampires taking our jobs.
Yeah. God damn.
Is movie makers, no less.
Well, it is interesting, yeah, that it can't just be that there's like a Dracula over there in Transylvania. The scary thing is they might come over here.
Oh, well, I think
they might legally immigrate.
They would have to be everywhere by now. Yeah. Well, this is the importance of a strong border, So you don't know how many people in Mexico are suffering from vampirism. Yeah.
Right. Or like lycanthropy, or like really any number of supernatural ailments.
Oh, so that's an interesting phenomenon in humans when it does happen, and people do think I was checking out this case study not too long ago of this guy in Florida who lost his mind, and drugs and other things might have been involved, but I'm not going to go through the whole story, but yeah, the story ended with him trying to chew someone's face off. And
it was sweet.
And look,
this is Florida, right?
Yeah, well, this is just I think so, and it's just another day. Like, to me, it's like, okay, there's just another day of mental illness in America.
Another day in Florida, or mental illness in America.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, because like the violence and the mental illness go hand in hand, and it's like even with or without mental illness, we have a lot of violence. It could be from the Draculas, but no one's ever done the studies. So
right, I kind of wonder to what degree. I guess I'll just say those kinds of like ailments, because I've also heard of like porphyria, hemorrhagic porphyria, something like that. There's like also a condition that people have like correlated with vampirism, possibly. But just the psychosis of believing that I'm a literal werewolf and therefore I have to eat somebody's face. That's so wild to me, because I don't know. I'm like wondering about the I'm struggling to find the word, like, of the he
was dedicated too.
Teleology. Teleology is the wrong word. I guess I'll just try and describe what I'm looking for here. Is what does that imply about human nature? If you could have a psychotic condition where you think you're a werewolf to the point of acting it out, is that like, because we wouldn't just like reduce that to like, well, he was just culturally influenced to think that way, because not everybody phenomenon
does. Right? It's telling of what lies,
but it can't be inborn because it's cultural.
Well,
right?
Are you saying that if vampires or werewolves didn't exist as part of the culture? Because check this out. Because part of his psychosis,
right? Yeah, that's a great way of phrasing the question.
He questioned his sister. He says, "I think I'm a." He said to give you a hint in words towards his condition. He did tell his sister, like, I think I'm a horse dog demigod or something. He said something like that, and he expressed this sentiment a few times as the family and other people were realizing something was seriously wrong. And then eventually he snapped. And, I don't know if he decided in the end that he was a horse dog or a dog horse, because he mentioned a few other animals somewhere in there. But yeah, when it finally snapped, and then get this, and when the police were trying to pull him off, dude, they tasered him, they kicked him in the head. They tried doing it minimally at first, just to, because they're thinking, look, he's chewing off someone's face. He, I guess the assumption is it's not normal human behavior. He'll give it up easily. And they just kept booting him in the head and tasering him and all this shit. And he wouldn't stop eating this guy's face. He was like that into it.
Shit.
Yeah, he became that horse demon vampire god thing.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to town.
That sounds like a good reason for having some sort of law against being a furry or another kin. No, in all seriousness,
because it works.
Okay, yeah. Well, that doesn't sound. That
much?
Doesn't sound like a. It doesn't sound like it's necessarily like a direct link to like some sort of legend or myth. It sounds like,
I don't know. Immediate psych. I don't know. It almost, the behavior seems like almost without any myth.
A
Because he did say
Jungian
God.
would probably say that he's like, he's just being overtaken by contradictory and violent unconscious impulses, and so he's correlating those with animals because that's like our animalian side, maybe. But he also is, the counterbalancing compensation for that is to say, is to draw from the other direction, right? Super ego. So I'm a man and I'm a horse dog thing, so I must be a god, right? So you
It's
can
all
do a
just,
very interesting Jungian like analysis of such a person, I guess.
yeah, it almost seems like a blowout of the subconscious, like of the subconscious.
Yeah,
Because,
right.
well, mental illness
Which,
is a weird thing because the question is, how do we even define it? Like the term, even the term mental illness, or let me put it like this. So those early psychologists, when they first started chopping open the brains, they thought they were literally going to find like, oh, look, there's a lesion, there's a sore on this thing, right? There's the
right.
illness. And then when that didn't happen, they were kind of stumped, and I think even the terminology gives it away that we think of it as a process of just consciousness, like a solely, I don't know, transitory or even transcendental, like it goes both ways, right? With the elevation or egoism of consciousness. But to me, it's like, no, it's, because we are not separate from our bodies. Let's say we're working off of that as a first principle, that there is in fact no separation. Um,
Mhm.
then to my mind, and this is what I came after reading Nietzsche a long time ago, that mental illness is actually closer to a disordered will, because similar to someone who's, you wouldn't necessarily call mentally ill, but who doesn't necessarily have a strong will, or who's depressive or something like that, you see that they, whatever it is in their life or their mind or body, they can't seemingly act on what they think they should or what they know they should, or whatever it is when you see those sorts of things happen with people, let's say. uh,
Well, I mean, if you take depression, I mean, it all comes down to, right. Okay, so
yeah, what
it's
kind,
funny.
because
So you,
we have
well,
categories.
right. Well, there's that, but when you're bringing up like how they originally believed, oh, we're going to find these lesions in the brain, right?
Yeah.
It sort of reminds me of like we almost had like a hangover resurgence of that same attitude with like the wave of antidepressants that we tried to, like, when we really realized
Oh,
that we
sure.
had a big problem with depression in America. There are all sorts of drugs and things that we've tried, right, that are
Right.
basically based on the model of like, this is some sort of physiological problem that we can just adjust. And I mean, I'm not going to say, I'm sure there's some people who'd be like, well, hey, those are effective, or at least marginally effective
Right.
for some people,
And then some people
blah, blah,
commit
blah.
suicide or have no luck, or are just kind of
Sure.
potentially inbound. Well, I
Right.
mean, because it's
I
imperfect. I
think I think
understand
it's
it's
fair to say though,
stopgap.
right. It's fair to say though, it's like, guys, we clearly haven't solved the depression problem.
Yeah,
So
or
this is not the answer. You can say like, okay, maybe it helps some people sometimes marginally at like that. If you're like at the limits of like on the edge of killing yourself or whatever, and this makes you feel like 5% better to the point where you don't kill yourself, okay, I guess good. That's
yeah. Well,
fine.
that's
But
a
to what you're
question of
to what you're
measurement.
saying though, right? Well, and I don't know how you can measure that, but so to what you're saying though, I think it's almost like when you talk about like a disordered will,
Well,
I
don't
would
they look
say,
upset? Don't a lot of mentally ill people look really upset that they're hearing these voices and that they can't, right? Like you see the fear, you see the anger, and to me, it's like, I think I would, from what I can perceive as a supposedly sane human being, I would say that I think I would be pissed off if I was suffering from that too.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, no,
I would be freaked
that's
out
certainly
too,
true. Well, I'm just thinking in
and I
terms
might
of
not be thinking like crazy enough
what
here. I
what
don't know.
causes I would say what causes most depression that people feel in America. Again, so there could mean a lot of things, right? Let's just
I
say
think
the
it's
whole total umbrella of everything that's called depression that is afflicting some large amount of the populace can probably be sourced to like external factors. It's like, well, what does that mean? Or
the conditions of
physio-
modern life. And I think it drives. I do think
conditions
it
of modern
drives a
life,
lot of
or
people
conditions of
crazy.
your own life where it's like, okay,
Oh, personal
you're
life for
just
sure.
you're not getting enough exercise, you're not eating right, you're not sleeping right. And
Yes.
people are kind of like, oh, scoff at that. It's like, well, no,
No, you
it's
have
actually
to
really,
address those
it's
areas first.
right. And it's actually really hard to address those. I sound like fucking Jordan Peterson, but you know, it's actually a really hard thing to do to get all that straight, but you got to get it straight. Anyway, you know, it's like that sort of speaks to what you're saying, disordered will, right? That
Right.
doesn't mean it's like I'm not big on like,
There's
well, that
risky
means it's your
behavior. I
fault.
mean, there's lots of things we do that seem, I guess we haven't established definitions of, okay, well, what's health? Because to a lot of people, I think what you might call health might be uh, boring or unsuitable for someone else, when it comes to either risky behavior or, um, I guess I'm thinking of anything like from extreme sports to, because it's like, look, okay, this person's technically healthy, but they're engaged in these other behaviors that could end their lives, let's say. So there's this element, or, any other profession where you might be in shape, let's say. I don't
Oh
mean to
well,
get
yeah, they almost
sidetracked
all.
here.
I would say if we're being sufficiently Nietzschean, though, part of health is risking your safety.
Yeah, because
So
what's the
if you
point of
don't,
it otherwise? Like,
well, it'll make you unhealthy if you don't. So
I think so.
I mean, yeah, I think I would say that's pretty close to an objective fact, honestly, because if you try to live a life of total safety where you don't do anything that could potentially hurt you, that's, I mean, we all know what that leads to because people in the US, we're living out a social experiment where there are actually people who can live like that. And when they do, I mean, what does that look like? That looks like agoraphobia. It looks like having no social life or hobbies and becoming obese and depressed and anxious and dying at 50, So
Lots
is
of
that really a
drugs,
healthy
lots of
thing to
stress,
do?
lots of pressure. But I mean, again,
Right.
but I'll say this, that there's that element of, what kind of measure of health is it to adjust yourself to a sick society, and whether that's, because I'll say this, like the whole mental, we were talking about the treatment of mental illness earlier with drugs, and that angle is like, okay, is it it's kind of a mental or social, it's partially a mental and social problem as related to one's will towards these things, because you could say, okay, well, naturally we have these social instincts and these other instincts, and you could question, because no matter how much the person is to blame for the behaviors and the things in their life, let's say, you could, to put it all on them, or say that they deserve everything they get, or that, that's what they created. Regardless of all that, like, I think when Young talks about this sort of thing, he points out that even though, this guy will come into the office to discuss the intimate facts of his life, that it's still inseparable from, the greater zeitgeist around him. He's also affected by that too. And I'm sure you've had weird dreams with, like, oh, what the fuck is, like, why are there Ninja Turtles here, or why are there, you know what I mean, like, to the degree that we do have all these images floating around in our psyche. But I do think that this more material approaches, it's like funny. It's like, I think it shows I don't know, maybe it's the dysfunctional halves of the Neoplatonic dualism, where it's like on one side, it's, we identify with the mind as this thing that's separate from the body, and even if we're not Christian or religious, usually there's this tendency to still believe and phrase things as if you are a mind that's separate from a body, or a mind that can escape the body. And then conversely, that regardless of where this problem comes from, that we're going to try to treat it materialistically, because we actually don't really have a good handle on how else to treat anything.
Well, and it's the idea that it's almost like we're mind body dualist materialists, right? That's I think you just you just like illuminated something for me, right? Because that's what it is when you think, oh, there's a problem with the mind. Well, everything's material, but the mind lives in the brain. So we have to fix the brain.
But the
so
brain's
that means
the body.
So there's a chemical imbalance in the brain. So we've got to address this with drugs that address the chemical imbalance in the brain. Or
I don't think we
the older
understand it
thing,
really
which
well,
is our
honestly.
legions or whatever. Well, but that's what I'm saying is like that ignores that again. And I've brought this up talking to multiple people,
Sure.
but and I kind of just alluded to it now. It's like your gut has a very strong vote
Right.
or it has a large number of votes in what your mood
Your
is that you're
serotonin
going to
production.
experience.
It's huge.
Right. And so
That was relatively. I think that was a recent discovery. I want to say in the last 5 to 10 years. And yeah, and who would have thought?
right. Well, but then you like there is like a common sense element of it, which you could look to that's gone back, 1,000 years of like, oh, you know, if you keep yourself, I mean, that's sort of like in a way we could say that that's like the naive Platonism, right? The
Right.
true is the beautiful is the good. The person who's going to have a positive outlook in life and be happy is probably going to be the person who's healthy and taking care of themselves. But now we just have a scientific basis to say like, yes, if you eat, nothing but cheese doodles and like Snickers and like soda, and then you feel depressed all the time, and then you're like, oh, I feel depressed, I'm going to binge eat all these foods that make me feel like get a little more dopamine, right? And then your stomach continues to try and like extract nourishment from like Doritos or whatever.
Right.
That it's like,
have you tried heroin?
Right. Right. And then so it's like that to me is like, for one, it's what you're saying, it's a disordered will. Second, it is
Yeah.
attributable to the broader society, because why
Right.
the
We were
fuck did we
too
stock the
successful.
shelves with poison?
Right. And then
That's
I
like
think
tastes
most
good.
people and then again the instincts, despite any conscious rumblings or assumptions that, oh, we've discerned and understood or overcome our instincts. I think it's, any kind of thinking that tends too far in that direction. I think we have a certain awareness. I think we've named a few traits, as a wider species in this linguistic project. But fundamentally, I don't think people have actually, generally speaking, it's not something that's just overcome like that. And I don't know that it can be, you know what I mean? It's in terms of general human behavior, to the degrees that anyone can
Oh
behave,
no.
you know
I
what I
mean,
mean? It gets weirder the
and
lower.
it's why I like Nietzsche's term drives. Um, because it's a little bit, I find it to be a little broader than instincts, and it's not but
Sure.
we'll just say like whatever however whatever degree to which you feel yourself liberated from your irrational and conscious drives is the degree to which some one of those drives is successfully fooling you and using you to its ends. That's what that means. When you're like, oh, I'm freeing myself from my drives. It's like, look very carefully at what you're actually moving towards in life when you start to feel like that, because that is a drive telling you that. It's a drive telling you it's conquered the other
Right.
drives.
I think that's a drive. Again, and then if the thought is you overcame that drive or that instinct, that you actually probably don't know what it has in store for you in that case.
Well, I mean, I'll say
Well,
this,
it's a
like
fucked
I
up thing
have had,
about choice. Let me say this about choice real quick.
yeah.
Like from an early age to a later age, we're making choices in life, whether we realize it or not. That's what we call them, at least. And they can have profound effects on us, whether we can see that in the short term or the long term. And you never know how that's actually going to affect you in the long term and the short, or you know what I mean? So it's really a weird,
Yeah.
it's like by the time you're even aware of this notion, it's already too late. Like you've already been, you know, like you've already been moving this, down this road, whether you realize it or not. And I guess that speaks to people's regrets in life,
Yeah.
that they could wind up to a position to even look back and go, how did I miss this? How did I not do this? This is, makes you never want to
Yeah.
be that person, doesn't it?
Well, it was another thing I was talking about um, in the episode with Nietzsche and Wagner. I really get the impression from reading a lot of the background material that, like, approximately 3 years when Nietzsche first became a professor at Basel, and when the Wagners lived pretty close to him, and he went to visit them a bunch, that those were like the good old days. Shortly after that, it's like he publishes Birth of Tragedy. His academic career starts kind of going sideways, and the Wagners move away. And then, like, yeah, other people will find other like momentous events in Nietzsche's life, right? But the way Nietzsche writes about it and talks about it, especially in Ecce Homo, I mean, he basically says in so many words, those were the good old days. But it's like,
Oh,
then you
right.
think about it, it's like 3 years it's not very long.
No,
And
not
so
at all. Well, I thought
it's
that
one of those things where you just never know. It's like you don't know, like you were just saying, how you never know how your choices are going to wash out in the end.
Right.
It's like you don't know. It's like things are going a certain way for like a long time, and all of a sudden it's like that's over. And then you may like realize like, oh wow, that was actually really great, and until I had this point of comparison, I don't really understand that.
Well, we're back to the microcosm of life and marriage and etc.
Right.
Right. No, and that's I guess that's the whole learning in retrospect or hindsight, that it really is hard to see when you're kind of younger and in it. Or you're really,
well, to go back, I mean, if I can drag it back to the first topic briefly, nothing gave me an appreciation of like what my past 8 years before the pandemic were like. The pandemic. I mean, nothing. I mean, I was at that point when I think back to how I felt in 2019. I mean, I don't want to say I was like, I was conflicted, we'll say, because I was having that awareness like, in a couple of years, I've been doing this for 10 years. Am I really that much farther along than I was at the beginning? You start to have those conversations with yourself, like, how long can I really keep doing this? Like, I'm going to get older.
So you're just,
and then, I've talked to other, older musicians on the other hand, including some who have kids, and they're like, no, it's fine. Just do it. Just keep going. So, it's good to have those people around you, but I was kind of having those that was kind of the state of mind I was in. And then, over the 2 years of the plague years, as we call them, I learned to cope with it, right? Of like, accept that this is gone for the time being. And I don't know if it'll ever come back. I mean, I thought that for a while, like this may never come back. And then going out and doing it again, it's like, oh, wow. The last 2 years were exactly as shitty as I thought they were. And like at the beginning, I was actually wrong to accept this because this was, I should have been lamenting and weeping and gnashing my teeth the whole time, because this is amazing. And I don't know, it's like it gives you that perspective on things of like having the point of contrast. So it's like, it is that way. I mean, that was a choice that I didn't make, right?
Oh, I guess, again, I mean,
inseparable from the conditions of the world. Yeah, but
the conditions of life are put on you. Some were your terms, and a lot are life's. I think most are life's, actually. It's whether we can see what life is asking or demanding, it's there. It's just,
right. And well,
so binaries too. Just, I only have two options: this one or that one or the other. Right? It's very easy to do. Be stuck there.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Wait. Before we get away from Nietzsche and Wagner, question for you. I wonder, that he called that the good years. I have Nietzsche talks about childhood and children a lot and all that stuff. And I was wondering, how much do you think Wagner reflected his relationship with his dad?
Like 100%. I mean,
yeah, it was huge, right?
It was
part of
Nietzsche's
why
surrogate father.
Yeah, and it's part, right? Because my understanding of how profoundly Nietzsche's dad affected him in the few short years that he was there, from the harsh discipline to the music, that it was a huge that was all huge to Nietzsche, and that he lost his mind first too, right? His dad.
I don't know about that.
I wouldn't say, I was just reading somewhere recently, and like he was ill first.
Liquefaction of the brain. Well, he fell like really sick for like a little bit of a protracted period of time, but it was mostly he just kind of went. I think he was just in agony, and then he went catatonic and he died.
Right.
I don't know if there was much of a sign of like mental decline before that, but Nietzsche surgeon said it was liquefaction of the brain, so he thought it was some sort of
out of everything you could get, you don't want that.
Brain melt.
Yeah. Oh, dude, how's Bob doing? Oh, terrible. He got the brain melt. Fuck.
Yeah.
No, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but to take it to kind of logical conclusion here, or because I know in some of his later personal letters, Nietzsche kind of called, like, it's very Zen monk to my mind, that he's like, I fear that I'm going to, I guess if he was a Zen monk, he would have just said, I'm going to lose my mind like my father and then die, a while after that. But he kind of did have that foresight to call his own fate there.
Yeah. Well, so something interesting. I'm aware of that.
The letters also, in particular, I meant, yeah, go on.
Yeah. Something interesting. This is what sealed the deal for me. And like, Wagner was his surrogate father. or not surrogate, but you know what I mean, like a
Yeah.
he was a surrogate for his father. Well, it's a weird term to use because you could say a surrogate in like a colloquial sense, but then also there is like a literal term, surrogate father.
Well, it was both a stand-in and a reflection that Wagner fit, and that Nietzsche even projected so much hope into Wagner, right? And that he even said like, oh, this is culture, this is the beginning of something grand, right? Like he was kind of going in that direction with it.
But so what sealed it for me that was for sure how Nietzsche regarded him is that his letters and journals are full of references to his dead father, up to the point where he meets Wagner and becomes his friend. And then at that point, those references drop off to almost nothing. And so I was like, oh, yeah, Wagner was his dad in Nietzsche's mind, basically.
Right. And he talks about, and so it had to be huge, the loss of Wagner's friendship, and kind of, he talks about that too.
But. Yeah, that's a very complicated thing, and that's why it's like going to be like a 2-part episode. Because like,
well, I'm glad you're talking about that, because I've seen analysts and write-ups and people talk about whether it's Nietzsche's biography or his life, and like they don't talk about his child. They hardly mention his childhood. They don't really get into those aspects on like his relationships, and yet it was huge.
Yeah, well, and there's also a lot of I don't know. You kind of see that like a lot of things get repeated. Like people read like someone else's summary of what happened, and then
it gets proliferated.
It plays like a game of telephone kind of, and then you like look at it like. So one of the things I talk about is like the Bayreuth Festival. There's like some indication that Nietzsche was kind of like, oh, I don't like these Wagnerians, but the main thing seems to be he just had headaches. He had a bad time because he had headaches. And that, like,
being grumpy Nietzsche is like, it reminds me of Schopenhauer being like, hey, police guys, you can use my balcony to shoot those protesters. Like, is that grumpy Nietzsche talking?
Right.
So you think?
Well, I mean, he says basically like, because he's like going blind in one eye, and like,
I know, and he had serious,
his eye problems, and he was saying one of the things he says in his life is like, it's impossible for me to look at anything. I had to listen to De Valkyrie in a dark room, and so it's like, oh, you're just having an attack of your condition, and so obviously you're not going to have a good time.
Or he's turning goth or emo.
Right? Yeah, he just wants to be in a dark room. He's like the new Batman.
No, don't call me Nietzsche.
Robert Pattinson. Yeah, I'm Vengeance.
Call me the Bat.
Call me Vengeance. It's a very topical reference about a film everyone will forget in 5 years.
Oh, yeah, like everything else, it'll be down the memory hole before we can. Oh, speaking of down the memory hole, what do you think of our Great Leap Nowhere? Remember when all the statues came down and there were riots around the country for like a year straight? Like, I remember we don't really talk about it, but
they tore down a statue of Cervantes, I believe, at one place.
Oh yeah, no, they got Stevie Ray Vaughan.
They did.
Yeah, they got Stevie. They tore down a statue of Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Not the one in Austin. No way.
Maybe no. It might have been elsewhere, but I know that's where the big one is. They got Stevie Ray Vaughan. They got Abraham Lincoln. They got Frederick Douglass, and I think it's very emblematic of like American ignorance.
I mean, yeah. It's also like I wouldn't expect like an angry mob to have.
Well, that's like, why they're so terrifying.
Foresight and education or care about things like that. I mean, yeah. I mean, well, I'm not particularly like terrified of it, but you can see that how the narrative from a lot of the media was
right, but
to read it like it wasn't an angry mob.
Yeah.
And that's what's very puzzling.
To give them free reign and to even encourage it in a lot of ways.
Right.
It's like that.
And by the way, the police did not act very professionally during that time either.
Sure.
It's like for every video you could find of like, look, they're burning down somebody's business who's just like just somebody trying to have a business, right? And it's like they're angry over police violence, and now they're burning down your business. Great. Or tearing down a statue of Abraham Lincoln or whatever. And then on the other hand, the police, like you could watch countless videos of just a mob of cops wading into a crowd and swinging their baton indiscriminately. Right.
Yeah.
And in Austin, the police like shot a pregnant woman in the belly with like a beanbag round, and she like had a miscarriage. So they forcibly aborted a woman's baby during this protest.
Yeah, if you did that, you'd probably get manslaughter.
Oh yeah, and that's like I don't know if the
Or
cops got
murder.
any punishment. There was an iconic picture of them like there's like a big billboard. I think it's gone now, but it was like right by I-35 in the heart of downtown. That's like, we're here for your safety or some slogan like that.
Well,
with
a lot
the
of times
picture
they
of
didn't
the
do
APD,
anything.
like, but well, so there was a big billboard up there with the APD badge, and it says like, protecting, keeping Austin safe or something like that. Somebody snapped a picture right as one of the cops is just like firing indiscriminately into the crowd from the highway, like with that billboard behind him, right? And so, like,
to illustrate
really,
what
2020 was during that summer was, I think the comedian Tim Dillon put it best. People stayed in their house for months, and when they finally came out, they were ready to kill.
Oh, I knew it was gonna. And you knew it was gonna happen too, right? Like it was obvious. And then when I try to talk to people about it, like it's like I get it. You're trying to keep your cool, but I was like, I need you to understand that I see that these people are gonna lose their fucking minds, and very few people
Right.
do that. And everyone's like, no, it's fine, everything's fine.
Well,
I'm like,
you don't need all of them to lose their mind.
No,
right?
and I get it.
You
I get
need,
it.
like,
this is how you come
need,
for
like,
yourself. This is how you, right? This is
well,
how
but
you
I mean,
pretend
like if you
everything's
want to
fine.
have a riot, I'm saying you don't need 100% of the crowd to riot.
Oh, right.
You don't even need. You don't even need a majority.
Right.
Like,
and then it brings the opportunists and also the crazy people out of the woodwork. And by it's a weird term because we were talking about
the hardest core people.
Well,
basically.
yeah, and then people who, like, there were all sorts of people who,
like Joseph Rosenbaum.
Yeah. Oh, no, dude, that's exactly who I was thinking of, and I guess we'll go there because here this guy is. It's literally a textbook Jungian description of how a violent zeitgeist affects those with psychosis. This is like John Lennon getting assassinated by some crazy guy who heard a mission from God. And this guy just happenstance got out of jail or the nut house again, and he winds up
got out of the nut house on the day that people are saying basically it's okay to riot today.
Right. And that the media, and that he joined in on that. And he wasn't actually a political actor. He was the example of that crazy person coming out of the woodwork. But then the media and that so many people involved in these movements would then latch onto this guy being like, look at this innocent protester, right? He was just an innocent child molester or whatever the things were because, he had a history, he had a rap sheet of,
you want to hear it? You want to hear a funny microcosmic story? That's like the same thing. When I was in college, I lived at these apartments out in the east side of town. It's like off of Pleasant Valley. It's not there anymore. It's called Campus Estates. And it was basically, here are some apartments if you want to fucking party. Because there is a party on Friday night. Me and my roommates, we would step outside and just open our ears to the wind and be like, where do you hear dance music? And walk towards that apartment and just walk up and walk on in. And we were always welcome, right? Anybody would just show up. And so that's the kind of environment it was. And at one point we went over to this one complex, or not complex, this other building on the other side of the complex where these people were having a party. And we had one friend there. His name was Mike. He was from Chicago and he loved to fucking fight. Any excuse, right?
Yeah, I know.
And at one point, we're on the balcony and we are looking out on like the sort of the lawn in front of this apartments, and there's like these women yelling at each other who are at the party, and everyone's drunk, and it's going back and forth, and then they start hitting each other, and then people start trying to restrain them, and then boyfriends get involved, and then suddenly, not only is there a fight, there's a fucking like brawl where 10, 12 people start piling onto each other and fighting. And then like all the other dozen people sort of in the wings or whatever, in the outskirts, all rush in. And it's just an all free for all. And my buddy Mike looks at us and he goes, shit. And he puts down his beer and runs into the apartment to get downstairs and runs and jumps in there. Right. So there's no broader point to the story. Some people just like to fight and they see chaos happening and they're like, I want part of that. It's exciting. Like, this is different from,
well, here's another question
stuff
for you.
Normally get to do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And it's excuse like you saw, and I think in those riots, COVID times here, George Floyd, all that stuff, we saw a lot of kids like, you know, I think of that white kid who was there being filmed throwing like shit on that fire in that police precinct. And a lot of those people, I don't think they got charged, but since they had him right there feeding the fire, they charged this guy. And there you go. And in one moment of the orgy, this kid forgets himself. And now he's serving 20 years in prison for burning, you know, and it's back to that notion of we often, you know, this is why kids and teenagers are dangerous. And, you know, I remember when my dad used to warn me as a kid, he'd be like, look, teenagers lack critical thinking skills. And it's hard to see when you're in it, but afterward it made sense, you know, that,
well, I mean, but
you don't have an idea of the long and short-term consequences.
Well, and people that should have known better. Well, it's funny because you're attributing that to teenagers, but that immediately makes me think
he was a little bit older.
6th. On Jan 6th, like how many people just kind of got swept up in the we're storming the Capitol. Let's go in. And like a lot of them were older people, but like when you look at some of the video of that, like there's some people who walked in there who they don't even really seem to know where they are or what's going on. Like they're just kind of like doing the thing with everybody else.
Yeah, not much of a plan, not entirely rational, not really an aim or purpose. And then, you know, it's
you could play yakety sax over it.
Yeah, or Benny Hill.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Benny Hill. Yeah. I mean, so I don't know. Yeah, it is interesting because it's like, it's almost, it's like you said, it's like you give in to that like complete like self-forgetting, and then it's like, oh, reality like comes crashing down to be like, no, it's actually very, very different from that.
You don't get to live here forever. You don't get to stay here forever. Well, before I forget, I was going to
ask. That's why I don't go to any of these, by the way.
Oh yeah, you're not a big fan of riots, and because you know dozens of people died, you know, to put it to take it, you know, seriously for a moment, right? Like it had a serious consequence, you know, billions in damage. And look, I'll argue that people can say what they will, but look, whether it's someone's business or a rattlesnake's hole in the ground, it's like you don't, like generally speaking, the law is that if you fuck with another animal, you're consenting to your destruction, whether you realize this or not. This also lines up with our working theory here on, again, we make decisions without realizing that we made them and without realizing there are consequences for us. So an attack on, you know, I think like, okay, your house could be robbed, and even if you didn't make contact with the robber, you could still feel violated. You know what I mean? You could still feel like that person, you know, if all that.
I've had my car robbed a couple times and you feel violated.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody was in my fucking car without my permission.
Oh, dude, speaking of which, I saw this one band get robbed outside of, they're visiting this museum, one of these local bands, and like the guy gets out there and he's like, ah, shit, they stole my insulin. It was like, oh, fuck, man. That shit's expensive too.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Like, wow, that's like the new black market of the future.
Yeah, probably.
You want to live? Yeah. What was I gonna say? Yeah, well, I mean, it's
we
I guess
brought up fighting. We've been talking about psychosis and joining the mob real quick. I did want
to I'm still thinking along those lines, right? That it's basically that's sort of the theory that I'm going with, that the reason why I don't go to things like this, like protests or riots or whatever, is because like I get all of that out of my system when I go like play music or
and you have an identity established therein. Oh, no, and I would say this, the difference between, okay, why would you not lose yourself in a crowd? Because you have your identity established as an individual and with the collectives you associate with. And then so why would you go want to lose yourself in this? That's where my mind goes. And I think
think about it this way, is that like the Dionysian rituals in ancient Greece is losing yourself within a ritual context. So it's like think about it like the magic circle, the trope of the magic circle. The magician draws some runes around himself or draws a literal circle in the dirt, and now I'm protected in this magic circle, right? Go lose yourself in a magic circle. Don't just go lose yourself out in the street with because like what's really happening there, like quote unquote losing yourself, what that means is I'm walking out of the city gates and the fucking animals are coming out to play. Right. This is no longer part of civilization. This is a wilderness. And in the wilderness, it's like, I'm sorry, most of you are not strong enough to survive in the wilderness. Most of us, I include myself in this. And so it's like, there's the identity element, but a lot of that identity is created by the fact.
And kind of what exists in context is back.
We're all doing this self-forgetting ritual at a metal show inside of a little magic circle. You can go forget yourself here in a certain way. There's a certain way that you do it, right?
Yes,
So
it's got a lot of
there's all
rules.
the
Even if you let yourself go, it's still got a lot of rules.
right. I mean, like, yeah, it's like don't you can't lose yourself to the point of becoming a werewolf and chewing somebody's face off, but you
Right,
can
right.
like go smash into people if there's other people who want to be smashed into, or you can headbang and like, or you can drink yourself to the point of oblivion or whatever. All these things you can do, but it's part of something that is not just complete reckless abandon and everyone throws away all the boundaries at the same time out in public, because like what that means is just like we're not respecting the rules of civilization anymore. And I'm sorry, that's like a really bad idea for anybody. I mean, I don't know. I know there's people out there like anarchists and think like, oh, we need more chaos, we need to bring down the system, blah blah
Well,
blah.
yeah, but everyone's dependent on that system. It's like, no, I think there's a false dichotomy because I think I see it manifest in both the right and the left in American politics, where they frame this this false moral equivalency, which it kind of frames like, are you on the people side or the machine side? And they both kind of do it, and they're kind of how it manifests in both
Yeah.
the melodrama of their ideology. Because this is something I want to ask you about. Speaking of ideologies, and this relates to, before we get too far, and I think it relates to psychosis. Let me expand this for a second here. Even those ancient sentiments of things like, not just that better to not be born, but better to have never existed at all, right? Like that, not just that life is suffering, but better to have never been born, and that all these cultish sentiment or all these sentiments or borderline ideologies have manifested in a certain cult-like following of these belief systems to the degree that people feel and think that way. So, whether it's, people writing pessimistic literature, or, a bunch of people on the internet talking about how much they hate life and hate breeders, and, what the anti-natalists call breeders, right? Or people who have babies.
Yeah.
Right, because they're mad that people are that anyone finds happiness or beauty here. I guess a lot of these people, they can't
Well,
really.
you're unfairly bringing people into existence, so you should stop.
Yeah, well, it seems
Yeah.
kind of naive to me. It's like, to me, there's an element of like
But
fatalistic
wait,
wisdom that's missing from a lot of that. But I do
so
think, I think it takes on this whole another, like, it's not just a sentiment. It's almost like it has its own force now. Like, okay, let me put it like this: you give an animal a voice, and what's it say about itself? And then with the over time, what's it saying now? And given a large enough voice, what does it have to say about itself? And that such large portions of like I think about, I guess, here about back to America, I think about psychosis, mental illness, violence, all these things here, and the political kind of upheaval and the social upheaval. I see a lot of these things at work, that these are a whole lot of different forces, vying for supremacy, essentially. It really is the will to
yeah,
power at work. It's manifested in different manner or expressions or ideologies.
yeah. Well, I mean, I've talked about it before. I mean, I think it comes down to like temperamentally what people are like and like where they're
Yes.
from,
Experiences too.
more than like a like people don't come to like a rational conclusion about what their
What their deal
political
is.
ideology is going to be.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was thinking, but in some ways also with what everything the culture has on offer. Like, let's say you're looking for answers as a young man in today's society. Where do you go? What are you looking for? Who do you talk to? Like you're Nietzsche, and your father died at age 4, and now you're being raised by a bunch of women.
You're being raised by Jordan Peterson and Alan Watts, right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, and maybe some Chuck Palahniuk too.
Well, if you want to really go nuts.
Well, and to me, it almost seems like a reality that there's a serious identity crisis. You know what I mean? Like, because that book was about that identity crisis. That here you have a man saying, I don't really, I don't feel like much of a man. He doesn't say that, but that's kind of the picture he's painting, from the shallow materialism to this way of life that he feels so alien to the point that he has a psychotic break. It's pretty nuts from a storytelling perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I like, yeah. So you're really, what you're getting at is the identity aspect of politics, right?
Yeah, well,
Of
and then
the
part of the broader American zeitgeist and culture period, like even go like, okay, if I brought up Fight Club, just saying like, okay, here was something bubbling to the surface back in the '90s, just as an example um, of what he was expressing in that book, and because a lot of it was about identity, and then the
right.
politics stuff now focus, it's those a lot of it is just identifying with tribal signifiers, both ideological and hereditary, yet there's also that component of identity to a lot of the politics.
Yeah.
Voting blocks,
Hmm.
minority, women, trans,
Well,
gay, right?
I'm thinking really in terms of like, okay, so when you bring up like Fight Club, right?
Sure.
A common theme in that movie is like wanting to find something real,
Yep.
and
It
they
is like
find it
real
through
life.
well, right, and they find it through like feeling and subjecting themselves to like pain and
Yes.
challenge and
Self-destruction and
risk and stuff like that.
self-improvement.
Right.
All the
Right.
masculine
Well,
shit he
and
was
so
lacking in his life, basically. All that shit that was repressed, it could only express itself. It does remind me, I actually meant to ask you earlier, you're talking about your friend going for a fight, and, I think that's a temperamental thing. But I did want to ask you, semi-jokingly, semi-seriously, how much repressed rage do you think there is in the average American male? Because
oh,
I think there's plenty. I think there's plenty. As a
I
matter of
think you
fact.
could fill Amazon warehouses with the
Oh,
collective
that
rage
works.
of our society.
That works
Uh,
metaphorically and literally.
right, but
Well
it's
done.
not just rage. Like, so that's often how it expresses itself,
Oh,
right? Because that's a way to
sadness.
feel something. That, but it's the desire for, it's the understanding that we're living in a fake world, like in what Adam Curtis calls a dream world,
Sure.
or in Nietzsche in his untimely reflections would have called a world of incorrect feeling
Jung
or
called it
false
a
culture,
Cinderella existence.
Cinderella world.
Yeah.
Yeah. um, we're living in a world that just feels like something is fundamentally missing. I mean, how many people have that feeling in their life? Like, well,
Oh, I think
something's
it's
missing and
common. A lot of people here are
I can't quite
miserable.
put my finger on what it is. And so there's like this, I mean, maybe it relates to identity insofar as like what people are looking for is something authentic, something that like, because, and I would agree with like Professor Jörg Moeller, or Hans Jörg Moeller, that
Mhm.
I don't think like authenticity is the default name of the game, like what identity actually is. I think what's happened is because we're so individualistic, we believe like we've been raised with a set of cultural memes that like what something real would be for you on the self-expression psychological identity level would be finding your true self, finding your authentic
Oh,
self, which
see,
is you, that's like
I
buried
don't think
deep
that's
within
right at
you.
all. I mean,
Oh
I
yeah.
don't think it's far. Well, I think I understand. We see this. Okay, this goes back to
Well,
our
so let me
sure.
put it another way. Look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The idea, the final uh the thing at the top of the pyramid is self-actualization,
Right.
right?
Assuming
And
that's a true or a, I guess a working model.
right, well, but I mean, what he says about somebody who's self-actualized is that they would be able to make their own, they would be able to truly make their own decisions. It's actually the way he talks about it. It's like they'd be able to truly have freedom because they
Yeah,
would
the
be able to act
theoretically conscious being.
independently. They'd be able to act independently of the age or the time or the conditions or their upbringing. They would be able to make a truly self-actualized choice, right? And so I'm not saying that people actually act in a way to be self-actualized. I'm saying that people have, I think, in American culture, this idea that a true what finding identity is will be some form of self-actualization,
Yes.
and maybe and
I think you're right in these things.
that's what they need to do is somehow find a way to become that person that in some way is like finding their true self, so to speak, right?
Right, well, this goes back
um
to having a voice, whether it's on a guitar or with your words. It's like if you don't feel like you have a voice, or if you don't feel like you're in control of your voice, you feel frustrated, you feel thwarted. Like, okay, you've been on the other side of authority, probably on any number of occasions where you actually don't have any power. It's like to anyone who's actually been there and knows what that feels like, it's like that's what it is, to not have a
mhm.
voice. and then to imagine that in perpetuity where you feel invisible or you don't feel seen or acknowledged at all. And maybe it's because you're a boring person, or maybe it's because there's not much to you, or maybe I don't know, maybe you have really low IQ, right? I don't know what it is that, I can't say what are the limiting factors in any individual's life, right? It varies individual to individual. But I think you're right in how people conceive of this. But this is where I differ in saying that, to me, I think the fallacy to bring the initial fallacy is assuming that you can find identity. I think we create identity. And, you were speaking as a Dionysian earlier when you were talking about risk. Like, of course you would say that. I think temperamentally speaking, it's kind of who and what you are, right? It just seems natural. You tell me though. Versus
a little bit of risk is like salt in the stew. You don't want too much.
And then there's unnecessary risk. Yeah, there's unnecessary.
Right.
Because like, again, if like a young man comes to you or me and he's asking us for help, it's like, well, shit, there's a lot of complicated stuff at work that makes it hard to impossible to even say, like, I don't know what's best for you. You don't, and that's your problem too, that you don't either. There's obviously some general guidelines and ideals, but it's like, you don't know that this kid can even handle that.
That's true, but I do find when people give me their specific circumstances, oftentimes I can tell them, like, for example, they describe a relationship and you tell them like, that's a bad relationship, you need to get out. And usually the problem isn't that, like, you don't have a lot of the time the advice that people need, or the advice people are seeking,
should be
obvious. What they really want is the permission to do something, or they want somebody to tell them to do it.
And that's always
they
dangerous.
Know that that's what they were supposed to do.
This is what's so dangerous.
They don't want to make the choice. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Then you're making the choice for them.
And then the question that they might or might not be minding, like, okay, imagine there's a difference between you telling your friend, oh, this is a toxic relationship, versus imagine Keegan as Jim Jones. Or do you ever hear about the Anthill people, the Anthill kids? They're real far out there, cult. Oh yeah. So this guy, you want to hear about the Anthill kids?
Yeah, tell me about it.
Oh, he like, I think they might have been Seventh-day Adventists, or one of the already, many variable Christian organizations that popped up. But he got his followers and kind of off and on through the years. But this guy's whole dig was he thought he was a healer. So he'd like get drunk, perform surgery on people without anesthetic. Then they would or wouldn't die. And then maybe he would or wouldn't get popped by the police. Yeah. And he repeated this cycle for like, I want to say decades. And like he castrated people and like chopped limbs off and uteruses and like all sorts of stuff. This guy was out of his friggin' skull. He abused people. He killed babies, did all that stuff. And this guy just operated in perpetuity.
Operated in perpetuity.
Yeah. To the degree
more ways than one.
Yeah. That a lot of times it's like, okay, a lot of killers and crazy people, all it takes is one body and then the police do something. Now I want to keep going on this psychosis and the mental illness and questions of cultural conditions here in America. But also, you were talking a lot of shit earlier. I was a little bit too. And I was wondering, because I actually happen to have, I swear these are very innocent stories, but I have a lot of incidental bad encounters with celebrities. And by bad, I mean, I somehow insulted them and like completely on accident, in good humor and faith, right? Like, but it just so happened that way. I was wondering, what's your worst celebrity experience?
I don't know if I actually have a bad celebrity experience, because every time I've met like a celebrity, like a real celebrity, it's usually very brief.
Yeah. Oh, they're brief.
Like I met I've actually met a surprising number like at the grocery store. Because out here in Austin, like certain parts of town, like you kind of can know where the celebrities are going to show up. Sure. I don't shop there because that's where celebrities show up, but like there's one in particular where tons of celebrities live out there, and like you'll see them shopping.
Right, where Danzig gets his cat food.
Right. Well, I've met like Pierce Brosnan and Dennis Hopper and
cool.
Not Dennis Hopper, Dennis Quaid. Sorry, R.A.P. Dennis.
All right, well, they're in a distance, so we could talk shit.
Drew Barrymore.
Oh, dude, she was terrible in ET. She was terrible in ET. She's so overrated.
That's the one thing I said to her, and she was like, "You were right. You're right." No, so that's the thing. I've never had like a bad celebrity encounter personally, because I'm always just say, "Hey, I'm a fan of your work. like shake their hand or something.
Oh yeah, no, I do that, dude. I've done that plenty too. But okay, let me give you a bad one because I think you'll appreciate this. I was on a hike with a friend of mine, and we were walking along, and I was looking off at something, off to the side, and she said something about Jared Leto. And I had no idea why she brought up Jared Leto, but I look up and I'm just like, oh man, I can't stand this band 30 Seconds to Mars. I fucking hate that band. They're always on the radio and shit.
Oh,
and then, yeah. And I look up and he's literally right there passing us. And I was just like, oh shit, and then she congratulated him on the Oscar because this was when he won it for Dallas Buyers Club. And I said, I don't know, congratulations too. No, and you see, like, look, by all accounts, seems like a nice guy. And I think he's a cult leader now too.
Yeah, he is.
But
he is.
No,
it's
and
amazing.
I understand why, dude. He's very pretty. He's very beautiful.
You got to chase that cheddar, man.
He's beautiful. Oh,
you got to work. You got to hustle and grind.
I should have apologized and asked him to marry me. Get that Jared Leto money.
He's a terrible joker, though.
Yeah. So he shouldn't do. Okay, his artistic license has been revoked on DC Comics and music by the
yes.
Okay, so that's one. And again, I didn't think that he was there. I thought
as a cult leader, he's an artist.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah, no, I'm for that. No, I think Jared Leto, he seems okay. This is the problem though. They seem like banal enough until it's like after the fact, and you're like, oh, they drank Kool-Aid and committed surgery or whatever.
Right. Well, this is why I don't think I've said this before publicly, but I've said it to a ton of people in my friend group. So do you know that conspiracy theory, birds aren't real? That's not like it's like a fake conspiracy theory. It's
yeah, I think I've heard yeah. Go on.
It's basically there's a couple people behind it, and they just started putting out this whole thing of like birds aren't real. They sell merch that says things like bird watching goes both ways and stuff like that, where the birds are actually like government drones, and like right. COVID was like everyone got locked down so they could change the batteries in the birds and like stuff like that. And it's not a real conspiracy. They're not purveying this because they believe it. They're making fun of conspiracy theories, right? And that might seem like that's what a funny thing to do. And hey, these people who believe conspiracy theories, they're not convinced by facts or evidence, right? Because it's a semi-religious style of belief. So you're not going to break through to them. One of the only things you can do, this is actually one of James Randi's methods. It's how James Randi tried to attack the problem of gurus and cult leaders, like we've been talking about. He said, well, the only thing you can really do is have a fake one. And then when that's successful, you point to it, not to necessarily dissuade the people who believe in it, but to warn off others of like, look, you almost got suckered into this. Guy could be like any of them, right? You can't distinguish a real one from a fake.
Yeah, he's a predator.
And if you can't distinguish a real from a fake, then that means like if the real is indistinguishable from the fake, it means that the whole discipline's not real, right?
Right.
The whole trade of that is not real, right? So I think that's the strategy with this birds aren't real conspiracy is we're going to inoculate people against conspiracy thinking by like satirizing or like showing how ridiculous all of these conspiracy theories are because
rational, right? Like it kind of
right. You can always come up with some explanation or some reason why something happened that doesn't seem to jive with your conspiracy theory. Now, but what I have to say is what the people who came up with birds aren't real may not know.
You know what I heard?
Well, hold on real quick. So way back in the day, the popularization of the idea that the Illuminati controls the government began with a Playboy, what was it? It was like an ad in Playboy magazine that basically said, are all the conspiracies in the country actually being perpetrated by one group, the Illuminati? And the people who were doing this were hippies who hated conspiracy theories and thought they stopped people from being free in their minds because it made them like chained by paranoia, basically, and suspicion at all times. Yeah. So we're going to satirize conspiracy theories by making up something so ridiculous that no one could believe it, that the Bavarian Illuminati, an 18th century utopian movement from Bavaria, somehow controls the entire government and corporate structure of America. No one could ever believe that. And lo and behold, here we are.
Oh, right? Dude, I remember I've heard
that.
People go off on that stuff, being like, oh, yeah, there's going to be a few years ago. It's like, oh, yeah, the 80-year shadow war is coming, and they get real into it and they just go and go.
Right. Well, but I guess I'm just sort of saying the people with the birds aren't real shit should stop because they think that no one could believe this and that it's all silly and they're going to satirize this conspiracy theory. Mark my words, in 10 fucking years, there are going to be people who legitimately believe birds aren't real.
Well, you know who they're really covering
And
for,
when
right?
when you bring up the fact that this is widely known to be fake, they'll be like, yeah, that was a psyop to make you never question the reality of birds. Right? They'll have their explanation for why even the fake conspiracy was part of the conspiracy. So
Well, obviously,
you're not
fuck.
actually inoculating people against conspiracies. You're just introducing another one because no matter how ridiculous you think it is, how satirical you think it is, and I don't remember how we got into this topic, but this is my public service announcement. Don't participate in making fake conspiracy theories. You're not helping. You're actually going to make things worse because it doesn't matter what your intentions are. Right? That's not why people
Well,
believe
I think they're
conspiracies.
doing it because it's bad. So generally, it's considered bad social taste to blame the Jews. So, you know, got to come up with something.
So you got to blame the birds.
Yes. Well, obviously the Jews are
Shift the
behind the
blame.
birds. You know, they can't fool us.
Right.
Okay, but we better stop
I agree.
for anyone. But I don't think we have to worry about it with whatever prospective audience we have here. If they're going to pull something crazy away from this, it's probably not about the actual.
Oh, this is going to get played at your funeral, dude.
Oh, I'm fine with that.
Like,
oh, okay,
it'll be part of your legacy.
So I gotta tell you a few more stories just because you'll appreciate how you know it's kind of Larry David shit a little bit. And then this one time I met Korn's guitarist, but it was their new guitarist Monkey. And I didn't know what the deal with them was or whatever. And I'm just like, oh yeah, you know, cool stuff, man. I like some of your stuff. But I liked him more before. I liked him, you know, I liked those first few albums, but not these new ones. He's like, oh man, he's like, I just got back. He's like, I just got here. And, you know, so basically I just told him I didn't like him or his direction with the band. You know, it's terrible. So and I felt bad, you know, cause it just happened. And then you want to hear the worst one. It'll take a minute, but it might be worth it.
No, do it.
Okay, you want to hear? Okay. The first part of the story is I was with a girlfriend at the time, and we were house sitting for one of her friends, and she was asleep, and I was just up late last night. I was watching like VH1 back when that was a thing. And then I think it was like some kind of history documentary of metal. And I watched it and then I can't remember at what point, but what was his name? Not Lane Staley, that's Alice in Chains, but Janie Lane from Warrant was on there. And and he looked.
I think I know the story you're going to tell.
Yeah, and he was talking about Cherry Pie. You know that they created the album and it was done, but they wanted.
Should have blown my brains out.
Yeah. Okay. So that
song.
Yeah. So that stuck in my head. So so everyone can understand. You know what he was saying was he compromised his artistic integrity, wrote this shitty pop song. It was basically the last major hit the band was known for before, you know, hair metal kind of fell away in American culture, and he hated himself for it, and he hated the song. And when
they wrote a whole album before
you remember it too.
And the studio wanted a single, and so they go back and they write this stupid fucking song just to give them a single, and then no one remembers any of the other shit you wrote in that album.
And they changed the name of the album too, right? To Cherry Pie.
Yeah, it's like suddenly the album's Cherry Pie. Suddenly suddenly the band is Cherry Pie. Yes. I'm playing fucking cherry pie eating contests. My whole life is cherry pie. I'm Cherry Pie.
Apparently affected us both similarly because I was just like,
oh wow, yeah, I'll remember that forever.
Speaking of regrets, no, but okay, so okay, here's where it gets worse. I tell you that story to go on with it. So I was picking up a friend of mine from the airport, and he's in the merchandising, right? He's in the music industry, and he was coming from the other side of the country. You know, he told me that he had a friend who was coming back with him. You know, it's him, his girlfriend, and business partner, and you know, he's coming back with a friend of theirs who's going through a rough time in life and blah, 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 blah. And okay, yeah, I got plenty of room, all good. Pick him up from the airport, and we're talking. And so I was talking to my friend about the documentary, and I brought up not Lane Staley, Janie Lane. That's right. Yeah. But I told him the story anyway. And, you know, I said, I remember that. It just struck me so hard that he said I'd shoot myself in the fucking head for that. And it's a serious warning. And, you know, the way you can be haunted by something so seemingly insignificant. And then my friend leans in and like nudges me in the rib, right? He's up there in the passenger seat with me, and he sticks me in the rib and he goes, "Hey, you might want to shut the fuck up. That's his wife back there."
Whoa.
Yeah, they were going through a divorce and shit was getting messy. And oh man, you know, I don't know if you know what actually happened, you know, because I caught it a while ago, but he wound up, they found him dead in a hotel room. And that's how.
Wait,
This
Wait,
was
they found
years
her
later.
dead in a hotel?
Years later. Sorry, there's nothing to do. That was an abrupt end to the story. So that was just
Yeah,
that was the foot. That was the whoops foot in mouth moment. And then years later, because again, it still sticks with that today. I can still remember hearing him saying that, how haunted he was. And dude, when they found him, the coroner said it looked like he had been screaming. When they found him, Janie Lane dead in a hotel room eventually. But that was just a few years ago. So yeah, things didn't, dude, his life got derailed and he never made it back. And it happens to a lot of artists.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. It's like, that's why I almost would say I enjoy the freedom of where I am, having never been famous. I mean, I've brought this up before, but Lao Tzu, like, there's multiple passages in the Tao Te Ching where he just matter-of-factly talks about how fame is a curse and like the worst thing that could ever happen to you.
People will insult you,
and right, you'll get dragged.
I don't know.
Lao Tzu, it's in verse 38 of the Tao Te Ching, says you shall be dragged on Twitter once you're famous.
Oh yeah.
No,
yeah.
I mean,
it's like the Buddha said, if you snap back, clap back on Twitter, thou will be snap back, clap back. Everyone fears the whip. No one's beyond reproach.
Yeah. I think that I don't know. I think really what it is for me is that it would like being a celebrity artist, though, because you get like people gain. I mean, really, like what we're talking about, right? With cherry pie. Mm-hmm. That's like an image that other people have of like what you are and what you represent as an artist that gets formed more and more strongly. Like the more terrible. You're in the public eye and the more you're known. And like I mentioned it kind of at the beginning, but like in Kurt Cobain's suicide letter, he quotes that Neil Young song I brought up. It's better to burn out than fade away. Right. And some people have interpreted that. The people who think that Courtney Love killed him think that he was just talking about leaving the music industry.
Did you see that? Did you hear that whole conspiracy theory with them and I think it was the Mentors, right? Dude, how do you think the rape rock?
Oh yeah.
How do you think the rape rock industry is doing these days? Speaking of the Mentors,
I don't, dude. It's funny you bring up the Mentors because like
have you ever seen them
on this past tour brought up the Mentors. No, I know what they're about. I haven't seen them live, but two people on this past tour brought up the Mentors. I'm like, I kind of thought about it. I'm like, I have no idea how that still exists. I guess it's like so beyond. It's so beyond the pale that like, or no, I mean like how anyone could even like, or like something like Gigi Allen, right?
Yeah, I thought of that too.
Like still do stuff, but like the fact that anyone has like a Gigi Allen patch on their vest or whatever in 2022 is kind of wild to me. I'm not necessarily.
Someone's keeping the faith, right? It's like, all right, there's something you don't see too often.
I mean, I personally don't like Gigi Allen because I don't like the idea of like you offer no musical value at all, but you're known for like the spectacle. It's like, okay, you're just not really like it's not really a musician at that like, point. And like,
vaudeville has more music than that.
By a lot, but I forget where we were going with that. Oh, Kurt Cobain. Well, so then like another person who killed himself. There's a band called The Devil's Blood. They're somewhat obscure, but they have a sort of a cult following. And I kind of got in at the end of like right before they. So the singer, or not the singer, the main songwriter and guitarist killed himself shortly after the band. Like he broke up the band and then. Committed suicide, and then they really blew up after that, right? But one of the sort of stories about how he was doing in the last months and days of his life is he had like a manager or an agent or somebody. It was somebody where he was talking to. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just a friend. I don't know. I'm messing up the story. The point is, he was talking to somebody right before he's about to go on and play to like a packed house because the band is like. They're still kind of underground. I mean, even at this point, they're like an underground cult favorite or whatever, but they were like they were rising, right? And they're playing bigger and bigger, festivals and stuff. And he basically was talking about how shy he is and how much he hates being around people and having people know everything about him and follow him around and everything. And basically whoever he's talking to says, well, get used to a lot more of that. Like you realize there's only going to be more of this, right? And then a couple months later, he kills himself. So
well, I think you see that Oh, gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it seems.
No, that's it.
No, it seems that for some people, if they're not built for it or of certain constitution or temperament, it's just even if they do want to give of their artistic ability to the world and others, it's like either the industry or the nature of, I don't know, even a fan base. Like, do you think of just how crazy a fan base can be and how ravenous? And I guess because, it's like the artist is the one who has the identity. They created what they created, but then the other people outside of them, right? They sing the chorus. They're the ones who come to identify with what someone else created. And it resonates with them, right? It means something to them to the point of maybe even being a part of their identity, right? So it's like you see that, I think why so many fans are so ravenous over whatever fandom it is, whether it's music or media or, politics, even, let's say, it's easy to see why people get so up in arms about it. Cause I think once you've come to identify so wholly with something that you can no longer differentiate, like this is an attack on that is an attack on me. Hey, an attack on Jared Leto is an attack on me,
Right.
Now, I don't think I insulted you when I met you, but forgive me if I did, man. And I guess, look, I know you're not a celebrity on par with fucking Jared Leto, but you're known around here and there, so
I don't think he did. I don't remember anything. I don't remember ever feeling insulted.
Okay, good.
It takes a lot with me, I guess, because
what you give a lot of goodwill.
No, because you got to have a good sense of humor.
Oh, for sure,
like,
for sure.
I don't know. Like everybody likes to talk shit, so you gotta put up with it to some extent.
What else can we say about Metallica and fucking Jared Leto?
Well, I'll say one final. I mean, I might need to get going here pretty soon.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's right. We've been at this for a minute.
We've been at it for
it looks like 2 hours,
almost 2 hours, right? But I'll say a final thing about identity, maybe.
Sure.
Just insofar as, and really kind of what we were talking about earlier, like finding something real. That's what everyone's like really looking for, because it's like overwhelming sense of fakeness, and they're looking for that with identity. And I think really the part of, what would you say? So like politics that's one of the things, right, that you just brought up.
Yeah,
like,
you can identify
people are using to fill that void, but it doesn't actually scratch the itch.
Nope.
Because it's not real. Like it's politics is intensely theatrical, and everyone knows that.
I think it's a good channel for melodrama.
No.
I think it's a good channel. So it winds up being a good proxy for the channeling of melodrama, but it's actually not the best. It doesn't seem to be the most satisfying vehicle for it, because it's so anonymous. Because to identify with the political party,
that's it, though, right? Is that so? People then. So the people who are just out there just like voting and like watching CNN, they're not really investing too much of their identity into politics. Like they found like other things, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really hit very well, right? It's like the weak tea version.
Sure.
But were the riots in 2020, was January 6th, 2021, were those like the most real political engagement this country has ever seen? Because that's something that really is like,
it's huge.
That's kind of what I've been like getting at. It's like, that's something that feels real to people. That's what they're like looking for. It's like,
that's the parallel of the Fight Club thing, where it's like, it seems like what's real, so much isn't real. What's real at this point is the psychosis and violence, right? The main character doesn't even have a name anymore. It's like, but what you can see that's real is the violence and the psychosis and all the reactions that kind of come from that, it seems. And I guess it does seem like quite the cultural unmooring, really. And you can see that reflected in the language that's all meant to distance and change. Well, even the way we use language, right? That there has been a sustained attack on linguistics and categories in the English language here in America.
Well, really quick, you were saying the main character doesn't have a name, which I know you're talking about Fight Club, but it made me think of They Live, which is a John Carpenter movie, which I think part of the reason why that's such a great film is because you don't have to come from any like particular viewpoint or political background or whatever. You can watch that movie and it so perfectly encapsulates what I think a lot of people go through. Like you have a moment where you wake up to like, oh shit, I'm living in a fake world.
Right.
And then you read between the lines of everything. And then like what is the point of that movie though? It's like it's the weaker point of it is the ending, because he just kind of goes and like he shoots a bunch of people. He like tries to like
They're zombies in disguise, right?
like blow up the satellite. Yeah, they're like aliens, but they look like weird zombies. But the main character doesn't have a name, and he's just in the credits he's credited as Nada, is like who Roddy Piper plays, which means nothing.
Yeah.
Right? And so I don't know. I think that movie is very like archetypal and universal, and it goes back to the freaking 1980s. People have been feeling like that sense of like, I'm insignificant, there's nothing, and I've come to the realization I'm living in this fake world. But then what do you do with that, right? And then when you go to the world of politics, you're like, this is theatrical and fake. And it's like people look and they're like, how can these people want to riot?
Wasn't that the Matrix too?
It's like, of course they want to riot and do violence, because that is what Roddy Piper's character Nada does in They Live. It's like, well, I'm here to kick ass and chew bubble.
You know what that reminds me of? If it's kind of like prisoner conditions, generally speaking. There's this part in Zaff's essay, The Last Messiah, where he says, one of the most evil things you can do with an animal is to imprison them. And he talks about that in relation to imprisoning, and it's criminals. What else can you fucking do with them, right? Especially, the most dangerous and predatory ones. But that's all besides the point. What he says is that under prisoner conditions, animals will often act out violently and aggressively. And he goes on to say that he sees this is basically the will acting out. It might not be a last gasp, but it is a gasping of the will to go, hey, I still have vitality here. Hey, I'm still alive here. So it's almost like that. Okay, so I guess this factors into how I felt years ago when the COVID shit was happening. I knew these people were going to lose their fucking minds, dude, because I know how repressive Americans are. I know how much average repressed rage goes around here. Things like that came to my mind. So I was doing the math back and when that shit happened, it's like, yeah, it was inevitable. I thought it was natural. I thought it was inevitable. It's like this was gonna happen, especially when the government and the cops were being pricks about a lot of those COVID regulations and shit. People couldn't even in some places they couldn't even sell online. Like they were restricting businesses in unnecessary and, unjust ways and unconstitutional ways, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even everybody immediately felt like everything, all of like our social life basically was ended by decree, and that did have like all these economic consequences and everything.
Yeah, but a ripple effect. I think they're still catching up to us. I don't even think
it's not even really by decree either, like because it was really, what would you say, it was really like it was a meme of fear that went around.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, I think that exists independently of policy.
Sure.
Because there could be open policies where you could technically, because I live in Texas, like we've been open for a lot of the time, like for the majority of the last 2 years. But that doesn't mean people are out doing things, right? Because during certain periods of time, people were scared. And I think for a lot of the time, that was actually justifiable fear. Because if you have an unknown quantity, it doesn't make sense to like be blasé with your risk analysis when we're first hearing like, oh, this kills 2% of people. Right now we know that's not the reality, and we have like treatments and a vaccine and all these things, but at the time, like it makes sense to me that climate of fear would be there. But at the same time, like the people who try to like
the unknown at that, right, it's that much more volatile. It's one thing when you know your enemy and how to fight. It's another thing when you kind of don't.
Yeah, I think that's how everyone felt, actually.
Yeah.
And but then regardless of where people were at on that or what the policy was, like the reality was that the social life was like destroyed. And
well, people quickly fell in line. That was the craziest thing about it, is that people quickly fell in line, because I feel like people had already been groomed at that point for like the sides were already picked, right? It's like, land of the free, home of the brave. It's like, you got left or right, white or black, right? Like it's all everything's down to its lowest common denominator, generally speaking here.
See, that's the thing though. I feel like it kind of, I don't know if I fully agree with that, like of how it developed, right? Because I feel like at the beginning, people were actually pretty unified.
Oh yeah. Well, there like, was it quickly didn't.
We could see but yeah, well, that's exactly it though. You can see the polarization around COVID actually increase over time.
Yes, and the polarization
on everything else. We're probably more polarized now on COVID than we were a couple months ago, and there's not really even any COVID anymore.
Right.
right?
Oh, and I
But
think by
now,
other party members, you would be
but I mean,
lambasted for
in
that
terms of
statement
like, if
alone.
you were to ask, well, I mean, if you were to ask the average, if you were to ask somebody what happened over the last 2 years, what they will tell you and the narrative that they will recount is going to vary wildly depending on what their
Yeah,
political ideology is.
which is
It's
also
not
their
going to have
temperament.
right, that's true. But it's like, and people will say, I mean, people on the left are guilty of this, of like, well, it's about people not being educated about science. That doesn't actually predict for what your COVID take is going to be. Your level of education in science, your level of education in the sciences does not predict
Oh,
what
yeah.
your take on COVID policy is.
Well, that's both
A single,
condescending
if
and
you have to
pretentious.
use a, but if you want to use a single factor analysis to determine what correlates with somebody's position on COVID policies, you know what it is? It's politics.
Yes, of course.
It's not your level of education. So it's like that, but it's funny because we've seen the polarization get worse and worse over time and more divided over what narrative we're telling about it.
I
And
know.
so that to me,
Go on.
what's that?
Sorry, go on.
Oh, it just, what that reveals to us is very interesting.
Oh,
that
I agree.
it's a that it's not a function of like accruing new information, like these varying positions. It's like, it's almost like a natural process, like the way Jonathan Haidt describes polarization in his book. He describes it like literally like electricity, or like a magnet. I don't know enough about physics, but like an object being polarized where the electrons go to the poles, right?
Oh, sure.
They're literally like pushed apart.
Yeah, and then it's like almost
So,
like there's nothing you can do to, and there's like nothing you can do to stop that reaction or that force if it's strong enough. Like if the criterion are met, like it's gonna go till it's finished. Like whatever the polarization
right.
in the conflict in this country, right? It's already begun. Like you're
It's
not gonna stop
subsiding
this
because
reaction in mid motion, though.
subsiding because we're forgetting about the issue, because the issue is fading away in light of new issues.
Right.
But that's not going to change how people
It's not going to change the division, right? The divisions are still there.
Right.
The tribal.
It's not like we're actually coming to agree. The masks are not coming off now because everyone agrees on
certainly
like the
not.
nature of COVID.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, I know we got to wind it down here, but quick question on kind of summing up this topic. So in the absence of, I don't know, culture and identity and, a clear cut, I guess with the American personality crisis, like, is this kind of psychosis and the fact that it's so common? Do you think it's like because I've heard people assert that it's practically a rite of passage in America. And I'm starting, and like, the more I look at it and the more I look at the forensic evidence in like our history and our literature and our media, it all seems to me to be there that psychosis practically is a coming of age ceremony in America, or some sort of mental illness. And obviously it doesn't affect everyone in all families, but it just seems very common.
Rite of passage. Well, I mean, two things come to mind.
Or a formative maybe a formative process is better. A formative part of one's identity. That's even weirder, I guess. But go on.
Well, it may be. I don't know. I mean, we have a lot of that in our mythos, right? Of like, oh, everyone has a midlife crisis. Oh, there's always teen angst. But I think what that's a function of maybe is we have created something that I would call maybe like a therapeutic or therapy culture, where I mean that both figuratively and literally, right? So I mean that like we've internalized many of the literal, actual, concrete guidelines of how a therapist approaches interacting with others. We've demanded to some extent that everyone act like a therapist for everyone else all the time. Or, okay, I shouldn't say we've demanded that. What's being presented as the ideal way to behave, the virtuous way to behave, the way to be a role model, is to be a therapist for everyone else, to speak to other people in the way their therapist does, to listen to them, don't judge them. You can ask questions, but just be supportive and affirmative of them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But another side of that is open up, be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to admit you have a mental illness,
Right.
or to and so I'm not going to go so far as to say that that's affirming mental illness. See, the problem is there's no problem with your therapist talking to you that way,
Right.
or with treating mental illness without judgment in a therapy session. That's what it's for. The problem is expanding it to the entire culture and suggesting that everybody should like accept mental illnesses as like a natural part of life or something like that. And I'm not saying like,
You mean like if your kids don't have it, like you got to give it to them?
well, and I'm not saying to like not, we should be less accepting of people with mental illness. I'm not saying
what's
that. And it's a shame I have to say this shit. Right, because but like, look, if you don't clarify this, somebody out there.
They're gonna be like, Keegan, eugenics. Look at you, fucking eugenics, man.
Right, but it is really as simple as saying, like, okay,
we shouldn't glorify mental illness. We shouldn't pretend like it's a good. Like,
it's a thing to get. It's a thing to like. It's a problem you should want to like overcome. It should be something you want to move on from, and not something that you should say that we have to affirm, right? And like. Or like be accepting of at all times. And that like, I get that it's like the problem with statements like this is like, they're necessarily contextual, because you have to deal with like, if like, you know, you have a family member with a severe mental illness that is not, there's no remedy for it. That's just how that like they have severe autism, for example. Right.
Or they snap and try and kill you.
You have to take care of that person. You have to like deal with that. Right. And there's no getting out of that by saying like, well, I just don't want to accept that or deal with it. But on the other hand, it's like kind of what you're saying with like psychosis being a rite of passage or whatever. Or how
it seems common and normal. Like
it's cool to be depressed.
Yeah, to share.
As well.
Like Tony Soprano, right? Like you get the quiet guy to open up, and he never shuts the fuck up, and you know,
right? Or having how many people do you know have had panic attacks? I mean, like I've had a panic attack or two in my time, and that to me is like, I don't know, it's indicative of the fact that we've got a widespread problem.
Yeah, there's a problem. It's an indicator,
and we shouldn't want to accept that. We should want to figure out what's causing that, so we can stop
treat the illness.
We would regard it that way.
Don't identify with it. I mean, because
we would treat it that way if it was physiological.
Well, I guess it's one thing to say like, my mental illness has affected my life, you know, just as an example of someone saying what if, and then it's another thing to sit there and glorify it as if like, well, what are you, to the point that, well, your spiritual identity in God's realm of heaven would just be a ball of mental illness. You know what I mean? Like, to where it's like, I guess it's no different than anything else. Like when people make gender and race their main fetish of identity, my thoughts generally are is like, they probably don't have much else. That's why they chose these things. They actually don't have much else they can identify with. I don't mean that like, and I don't mean that as an insult or a dig. I just mean, I think
it's Doug Stanhope and like his comedy where he's like, whenever somebody tells you they're an Irish American, you know, they have like nothing else going for them.
That's pretty good.
It's like one of those things.
That's pretty good.
It's just like when he's like, I'm an Irish graduate of some, it's just like, dude, you have nothing. Like, why are you bringing up that? But it's like, you know, Doug Stanhope.
Go drink yourself to death. God damn it. No.
Yeah. Oh, he probably will.
Oh, Doug. Hey, well,
yeah, we played in Bisbee, Arizona, where he lives.
No shit.
He didn't come to the show.
Ah, boo.
Yeah, he talks about it in his act apparently. But yeah.
Is that a good time to stop it?
Yeah, I guess let's
do the roundup.
Wrap this thing up.
Yeah, so again, this has been Every Trivial Fact. I'm your host. My name is Noah. This is my friend Keegan here. Do you want to tell people where they can find your work, your music, anything you got on the horizon?
If you Google Destroyer of Light, you have to put in Destroyer of Light band now, because there's a popular Greek fiction, ancient Greek-based fiction called Destroyer of Light. And that's the second book that is like ancient Greek romance novel that is called Destroyer of Light that's come out. There was one that was not as successful at the beginning of our career, where we always beat them in Google, and then this one, I guess, invested a lot into advertising. That'll change once we start putting out albums again. I think
I say that could be your next concept album.
We're gonna have more like longevity. But anyway, you can Google it and you'll find everything on there. We'll be in the search. You can also find us on Bandcamp, storyoflight.bandcamp.com. I've got a YouTube channel. It's Essential Salts. Exactly, just those two words, no space. Essential Salts. I have music up there, or live performances of bands, and the Nietzsche Podcast also. You can find the Nietzsche Podcast on Spotify. That's it.
All right. Yeah. Thanks again for joining me, man. That's probably good for today.
Later.
You got to give me a signal like love in an elevator. I need something like that. So that night I wrote Cherry Pie, sent it to him. He lived with it over the weekend, and all of a sudden the album's called Cherry Pie. The record's called Cherry Pie. I'm doing cherry pie eating contests. The single's Cherry Pie, right? If I'm lying, I'm dying. And my legacy's cherry pie. Everything about me is cherry pie. I'm a cherry pie guy. I could shoot myself in the head for writing that song.